Chapter 11. Unsinkable, unsinkable. George whispered those words like a prayer over and over in his mind. He thought of Mr. Andrews, of how sure he was of this ship. But the longer he stared at that water, that foaming green water, rising higher every second, the more certain he became. The Titanic was in trouble. We must go up, Marco said to Aunt Daisy. We find a way, but she shook her head, holding up Phoebe's bright blue coat and her life jacket. My niece Phoebe, Aunt Daisy said. She's down here. George could see her. She was fighting back tears. George had never seen her look so sad and helpless. Not even when Uncle Cliff died. She came down here looking for me, George said. We can't find her. Marco's amber eyes became very intent. An idea, he said. He knelt down and spoke to Enzo in Italian. The boy smiled and nodded. Then Marco hoisted the little boy up onto his shoulders. Enzo took a huge breath and screamed, Phoebe! Phoebe! People stopped talking and stared up at the boy with the foghorn voice. Phoebe! Phoebe! As a hush fell over the crowd, George heard a faint voice. I'm here, I'm here! The crowd parted, and Phoebe appeared. Her, her spectacles crooked, her face pale. She staggered forward and threw her arms around George, burying her face in his chest. I found you, she whispered. George didn't bother arguing over who did the finding, and anyways, his words were stuck in his throat, so he just held her tight. It took some time for Phoebe to calm down enough to tell her story. That yes, she had been looking for George and hidden for the baggage hold. That she got caught in the crowd of people rushing towards the back of the ship. It was like a stampede, she said. As Phoebe talked, Aunt Daisy helped her into her coat and life jacket. Enzo held Phoebe's hand like they were old friends. And the strange thing that it felt that way, like they'd known Marco and Enzo forever. Maybe that's what happened when you got trapped in a floating ship together. George started to feel calmer with Phoebe close to him. But then came a deep booming sound, a kind of groaning that echoed up all around them. At first, George thought maybe the engine had started up again, but no, this wasn't the sound of the Titanic's mighty engines. The entire ship catapulted forward. People fell, toppling like dominoes. George was thrown into the wall. Screams and shouts echoed through the hallway. He managed to grab Angel by the life jacket as he went sailing by him. Angel just giggled as he fell into George's lap. To him, this was a fun game. George hoped he never figured out that it wasn't. What was that? Phoebe gasped, digging her fingers into George's arms. Nobody answered. But they all knew. The Titanic was sinking. We will go up, Mungo said. How? Aunt Daisy said. Phoebe grabbed George's hand. You, Georgie, she said. What? George said. Phoebe's right, Aunt Daisy said. You know the ship's better than anyone. She turned to Marco. He exploded every inch. George couldn't believe it. They were counting on him. They were counting on him? But what if he made a mistake? What if they all got lost? You can do it, Phoebe whispered. And so George closed his eyes, picturing Mr. Andrews' blueprint in his mind. And he remembered the escape ladders. He remembered what Mr. Andrews had told him. The ladders are in the stoker's quarters, and they run up 3 decks. He pointed towards the front of the ship. This way, he said. Chapter 12. There was no crowd here, just abandoned trunks and suitcases, and water. It was seeping into the hallway from under the doors of some of the cabins. No wonder those people were trying to push their way upstairs. They'd probably known right away that the ship was in trouble and the bottom decks were flooding. The door to the stoker quarters was locked. Marco handed Enzo over to George and rammed the door with his shoulder, breaking the lock. George rushed inside and went to the back wall. And there it was, a ladder bolted to the wall, just like Mr. Andrews said it would be. It came through the floor and shot straight up through an opening in the ceiling. George almost laughed with relief. Bravo, George, Marco said. Bravo, Giorgio, Enzo said, clapping. George hopped up onto the ladder with Phoebe and Aunt Daisy at his heels. George was worried about Enzo, but the little guy scrambled like a monkey right ahead of Marco. They came up in a small dining room meant for crew members. And then George led everyone down a long, second-class corridor, up the grand staircase, and finally out onto the crowded boat deck. They made it. An officer came hurrying over to Aunt Daisy. Madame, there was a lifeboat about to leave. You and the children must come at once. The man looked at Marco. Women and children only, sir, he said somberly. I'm afraid you will have to stay with the other gentlemen. Marco nodded. Yes, he said. I know. Phoebe had been right. There weren't enough lifeboats. Not nearly enough. What would happen to all of these men on deck? There were hundreds of them. And what about the crew and those people down on G deck? George's heart was pounding so hard he thought it would break through his chest. He felt dizzy and sick. Marco got down on his knees and spoke very quietly to Enzo. Enzo nodded. Marco kissed him on the forehead. And then Enzo ran over to Aunt Daisy. She picked him up. I say he will go on a special boat ride, Marco said. I say you will not leave him, Aunt Daisy nodded, her eyes welling with tears. I promise you that. Marco and Aunt Daisy looked at each other. Neither of them said a word, but a whole conversation seemed to happen with their eyes. Phoebe was really crying now, looking away so Enzo wouldn't see. George felt like someone was choking him. Come on now, the officer screamed. And so they left Marco, and when George turned around, just a few seconds later, he was gone. The officer led them through a crowd of men to the other side of the ship, where a lifeboat hung just over the side. It was packed with people, all women and children, except for 2 sailors who stood at either end. An officer helped Phoebe over the rail, and then one of the sailors reached over and pulled her into the boat. George helped Enzo, who tumbled in next to Phoebe. Aunt Daisy had a hard time climbing over in her skirts, but George held her hand and she finally made it. Now it was George's turn. As he took a step over the railing, somebody pulled him back roughly. No more room, the officer said. Women and children only. Lower away, he called. No, called Aunt Daisy, standing up in the boat. He's only 10 years old. Wait! The lifeboat rocked and almost tipped over. Lady shrieked. You will drown us all, a woman shouted. Sit down or I'll throw you over, the sailor said. And now Phoebe was screaming too. and Joe howled. George was too shocked to move. Phoebe leaped up and grabbed hold of one of the ropes. She was trying to climb out of the lifeboat. Back to George. He gasped at her hand as her hand slipped and she dangled over the sea. A sailor grabbed her around the waist and threw her into the boat. And then the boat slid down on its ropes and splashed into the water. Aunt Daisy and Phoebe were shouting up at him as the sailors rowed the boat away. George stood there at the rail, watching his entire body shaking. Watching. His entire body shaking. He stood there for what felt like a long time. After the boat disappeared into the darkness, he couldn't look down at the water. So he stared up at the sky, at all those stars. He closed his eyes and told himself it was a nightmare. He was really asleep in his suit. Oh no, he was home on the farm in his bed with Phoebe sleeping across the room and Papa sitting by the fire downstairs. He closed his eyes tighter. He tried to block out the terrible noises around him. He felt himself tipping to the side and he held tighter to the rail. And then he couldn't hold on anymore. His hand slipped, and George fell, smashing his head on the deck. And then there was silence.